technology has to help you innovate. AI, getting to know our guests, getting to know, what their travel patterns are and what they really enjoy, and being able to serve that up to them, I think is kind of the next big thing. Doing AI with predictive maintenance, and the operations side has the use of AI as well. So, you just got to keep thinking outside the box, and, with safety as your number one priority, but then thinking about how can we make this airline better for our guests so they love us even more than they love us today.
Walker and Dunlop brings you insights for life. Unique perspectives from impactful leaders. This is the Walker Webcast with Willy Walker.
Good afternoon, everybody. I started my day in David's time zone, and I've flown to the East Coast and just landed and ran to a conference room to put this on. Sorry, we're a couple minutes late starting this morning, but great to have the hundreds of you, and it will be thousands in a moment, streaming in to join this conversation with somebody that I have tried to get on the webcast for quite some time. I'm absolutely thrilled that David has joined me, and have the utmost respect for David and what he has done throughout his career. Most importantly, I think, because to those people who watch the Walker Webcast and know a little snippet of my background, I actually started an airline in Argentina back in the late 1990s. And so when David and I turn our attention to Brazil and David's Azul launch in Brazil, we'll have some shared experiences in that part of the world. But David, nice to have you with me, and thank you for taking the time.
Thanks, Willie. It's great. Thanks for the invitation.
You're very welcome. It's a true honor. David, there's so much to talk about, and I know that a lot of people listening in today, want insights on aviation, and want insights on entrepreneurship, want insights on leadership, all things that you know a tremendous amount about. As I think about your career and having started five airlines, and started five airlines in different countries with different business models, I sit there and say, what is it inside of David that drives that entrepreneurial spirit? What was that childhood experience that said to you, I either have the chutzpah, the guts, the vision, the entrepreneurial gene that says I'm going to spend my life starting new things up?
It's a good question. I think it probably started as, trying to think outside the box and do things differently. And then it just evolved into pure insanity over the years. No, it's like, why do you keep doing this? This is crazy. It's really the hardest business ever. But, I don't know. I figured out in my early 30s that I had attention to deficit disorder, and everybody wants to have it today or says they have it or whatever, but I had this kind of unique ability to just look at something and say, I think I can do that better, or put myself in the position of the consumer and say, I want to be, I want that different. And it all started with I was enamored with Southwest Airlines. I just was obsessed with, Southwest Airlines back in the day was the coolest thing ever. Cheap fares, hot pants for stewardesses. I mean, that's how Herb started. That's not what enamored me, but it just was a transportation system that was efficient, turning planes in 20 minutes, allowing low fares, allowing people to travel. And so my first airline, I patterned it almost exclusively after Southwest Airlines, so much so that they acquired it. So that was kind of my first one. But it was just, thinking outside the box. We were the first airline. My first airline was Morris Air. We were the first airline ever to have e-ticket travel, for example. And that just came from ADD, lose my tickets, leave them at home. Why do I need a ticket? Why can't I just have a confirmation number? So, hey, Dave Evans, who was a guy working on backing up computers, saying, can you build us a reservation system Well, it needs a relational database. Okay, who has a relational database? HP 9000. Okay, let's do it. So, just trying to look at things, simplify it, and solve problems.
What about working for your grandfather in his grocery store when you were 9 years old? Did that have anything to do with it?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's had to stand on a milk crate because I was too short to check people out. But my grandpa was an entrepreneur, and he really wanted to please customers all the time. And he had this little convenience store back in the in I actually the 40s that made fresh sandwiches and had donuts, and it was the precursor of 7-Eleven, which much better quality, because he thought that's what people want. Come by, grab a sandwich, grab a donut. And so I learned kind of at his feet how to have an obsession with pleasing customers, or what we call guests at Breeze.
And you were born in Brazil. Was Portuguese your first language or was English your first language?
Well, my parents are American, but according to my parents, we left Brazil when I was 5, but they said that amongst us kids we would all speak Portuguese to each other. So I guess that was my first language in a sense, but that was pretty quickly replaced when we moved to the United States when I was 5 years old.
How was your Portuguese when you went back down to start up Azul?
It was good, pretty good. I went on a mission, thank goodness. I had completely forgotten Portuguese, and then we're members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and we have this missionary program. And you don't get to really choose where you go; you're just assigned to a certain spot. But because I was born in Brazil and had a Brazilian passport, my dad had served in Brazil, so I had the privilege of being called back there, and I was able to relearn the language, and then I've kept it ever since. So
Where'd
not
you do your
letting that
mission?
go again. I started in Rio de Janeiro, and then they divided the mission, and I spent most of my time up in the Northeast. Then that was a hallmark experience for my life, because you know, uh, and the reason I was born there is my dad had served his mission there. It was just a random coincidence. But then he went back to work as a journalist. And I was born there during the time we were living there, as he was a foreign correspondent. What was interesting about that is when I was a young kid, I went as an expatriate. I thought Brazil was the coolest place on earth and everybody was rich because that's who we hung out with. As I went back as a missionary, I was with all the poor people and I was angry. I was ticked. I was like, are you kidding me? And so, I just, that was the first time in my life I ever had success in my life where I could lead and I could learn a language, and I felt like I could accomplish a lot of things. And that was really a hallmark experience. But then I kind of filed this little thought back in my mind as a 19-year-old boy. I'd love to come back in Brazil and create a company that could lift a lot of people out of poverty and serve the masses instead of just the 30 million rich people that live in Brazil.
But when you came back from your mission, you went back and finished up at the University of Utah, and then you went out
I
to
didn't finish up.
Hawaii.
I didn't finish up. I dropped out.
You dropped out. Okay.
Yeah, I don't want to leave any impression. I do have 6 honorary doctorate degrees, but I do not have a graduation degree. So don't want
That's
to
great.
leave any
Um,
misimpression.
so you came back to the States, and then you went out to Hawaii and started working in timeshares. Talk for a moment about that entry and Al Lever's timeshares that you ended up marketing for him and then bundling.
Yeah, I mean, I stayed in Salt Lake, but I met Al Lieber actually through someone in my accounting class at the University of Utah, and he was struggling to sell his timeshares. So I didn't offer to sell him. I just offered to pay him the maintenance fee every week, and then rent him out, and then kind of keep the difference between what I charged and what I needed to pay him for the maintenance fee. So that's how I launched my first company.
But there was the added piece to bundling in air transportation that made the timeshare seem a little bit more attractive, right?
Yeah, people in Utah love Hawaii. It's like the coolest
And
thing
doesn't
ever.
everyone love Hawaii?
Well, they have a special affection for it, I would say. That and Disneyland. So we got airfare off the West Coast, and people would have to drive all the way to LA, get on this cheap flight with Hawaii Express. Started with Pacific East, and then went to Hawaii Express, and then people could have a package to Hawaii that they could take the whole family, and these condos could fit like six or people, so you could take your family of four and drive 8 hours and fly and afford to go to Hawaii, which a lot of people couldn't do.
And as you were starting that up, why not just stay in the travel agent industry rather than moving into aviation? I was listening to a conversation that you were having, David, where you talked about that you love the Boeing 757. And as someone who's liked airplanes my entire life, I can remember distinctly when the 757 came out and what a great airplane that was. Have you always had sort of an allure towards aviation, or was it just that you happened to be in the travel industry and saw that the bundling of aviation with it could be something you could sell?
Yeah, it was just, you know, if you can't get to Hawaii unless you have a cheap way to get there, you can give them a cheap condo, but if all the fares are really high, you had to figure out kind of a way to package it together. And my beginnings, at Azul, we have this $500 million a year package business, and I had to push that really hard, and I'm starting to push it here at Breeze. But I keep explaining, that was my beginning. That's how I started, was in the vacation package business. So it's kind of always been near and dear to me because it just solves a need for people to be able to kind of put it all together.
But you realized at an early age the sort of the cyclicality of the aviation industry, and that Hawaii Express went under and you'd pre-purchased some tickets on it, and that kind of took down that line of business.
Yeah.
Why wasn't that the warning signal that aviation and travel might not be the industry to focus on?
That's where the mental illness, that's where the sickness started to, that's where we bridged into insanity, I think. Thinking, hey, I should go do something else. But once aviation gets in your blood, it's pretty hard to get it out, unfortunately.
On my flight out here, I was with two colleagues of mine, and we were sitting around talking about aviation. And I just said, everyone I ever met in the aviation industry when I was launching Alta down in Argentina, once you get it in your blood, you sort of don't get it out. It's just this incredible lure of moving people and the jets and the pilots and the whole nine yards. It's just one of those industries that once people get into it, they just can't get it out of their blood.
Yeah, when I was at JetBlue, and uh, we were flying high, and the PR department called my parents and said, "Do you have any pictures of David as a young boy?" And we're trying to figure out how we got into aviation. And there was this picture of my 3-year-old birthday. I'm standing there with a big airplane on my cake, and they said, "That's it, that's it, that's that." But I remember just recently that we actually had an airport right by my home when I was growing up in Sandy, Utah, that I'd go up there and watch the parachuters every day, and sit under the approach and watch the planes fly over. So I think I've always been enamored with aviation.
Are you a pilot?
I'm not, no, and you know it. You don't want someone with ADHD to be your pilot. I would suppose. I mean, my form of it, where my hyper focus is on the business, and I always tell our pilots, we have a deal. I won't tell them how to fly the airplanes if they don't tell me where to fly the airplanes. So, each of us have our different skills in life.
And do you enjoy flying?
I enjoy going to places. I think, JetBlue, we were the first airline to ever have live television on the airplanes. And part of that reason is that I was completely bored on an airplane. Even reading, we didn't have phones and being able to listen
Right.
Audible and all that kind of stuff, back 25 years ago. So I wanted something to entertain people, to make traveling at least a neutral experience, so it wasn't negative. And so that's why I found this company that had live television. And as soon as I saw that, I'm like, we're putting that on our airplanes. That's going to be really cool. So yeah, I don't. Obviously, I like going places. I like seeing new things. But the trying to make the journey as neutral as possible.
I remember distinctly, David, your interview on the Today Show back in 2000 when you were launching JetBlue. and you were on the plane with the TV screens behind you. And I remember distinctly, I think it was Matt Lauer who actually did the interview with you, and you're sitting there with the TV screens in the back of the seats. How difficult was it to get Airbus to build the television screens into the back of the seats? Because that was totally revolutionary at that time.
Yeah, it took us a few months after we started flying. The first airplane didn't come with them. We had to retrofit. But somehow I think things were probably easier 25 years ago. Today we're trying to go from 12 first class seats to 20 first class seats because we have so much demand, and that process is seems to be a lot more difficult, moving seats a couple of inches here and there than it was to put those TVs in the seat back pockets. So I think there's just been more and more regulations come on, but no, we got it done though, and from the first time when people walked on that brand new airplane, they saw those leather seats and they saw those live televisions, they were completely blown away. I mean, so much so that we had a 9/11. We were down. Our CFO was down printing the prospectus to go public on 9/11, and was able to escape that terrible tragedy. And then the following April, we went public, and we closed at a price that was 1.7 billion, which is a few hundred million than even JetBlue trades at today, and that was 23 years ago.
Wow. And the slogan that you had there was bringing humanity back to air travel, but you seem to have taken it beyond humanity. I mean, as I think about that slogan, David, there's clearly a little bit of Herb Kelleher in there, in the sense of like, let's have an experience that has nice people who treat you like another human being. But then there was also the things that you just pointed out as it relates to technology we'd never seen before. The leather seats on a lower cost airline that was up until that point very much associated with just first class. You would see leather seats in first class, but you saw no leather seats back behind it. What were those? How did you think you could differentiate at that price point, putting those additional amenities into JetBlue back in 2000?
Yeah, yeah, it's a good question, and just starting with Herb Kelleher, one of the things that I was briefly at Southwest Airlines for about 6 months, and I effectuated a lot of change there, and Herb said, yeah, I wanted you to be my successor, but you ticked everybody off, and I named off all the things. I started e-ticket for them. I got them, convinced them to change their faring to have peak on Sunday because they didn't have peak travel on Sunday. I put heads-up display in the airplanes so they could land in foggy conditions when they weren't using all the equipment. Had all that stuff, and he said, "Well, you should have taken 2 years to do that. You did it in 6 months, and it ticked everybody off. So you got to go." So I learned. But
Wait, just one quick thing before you keep on going on that, because it's fantastic. Just, I know it was a luncheon at Ruth Chris. I mean, how was that lunch? I mean, was Herb basically? I mean, was he giving you good, honest feedback in a very caring way, or was he like, you know what, David, you pissed everyone off, you got to go?
No, he was, you know, honestly, it was dinner, early dinner, and I actually cried, and he grabbed my hand and said, "It's going to be all right." But he was being sweet and kind, and we remained friends until he died. And I went to his funeral, and he was a great man. But on that was his tender side. His business side is like, this is the last guy I ever want to see in this business. He had convinced me to sign a 5-year non-compete.
Right.
And then when the Justice Department asked me to come back and visit him with their general counsel, which was Jim Parker, who succeeded him for a short period of time and has since passed on. And this is why I can tell the story, because they're both no longer with us. I don't want to embarrass them, but I'm back at the Justice Department, and they said, "Now, what are you going to do now that you've left Southwest?" And I said, "Well, I can't really do anything for 5 years in the U.S." And they're back. They went up on their backs and they said, "5 years?" And they looked over at the general counsel, Jim Parker, and he kind of waved them off and said, "Oh, we know it's not enforceable." So I left there like, wow, okay. So I called Herb and said, "Look, I'm not going to fly where you fly because I'd be an idiot to do that. But Jim's admitted this is not enforceable." And he said, Herb basically said, "I'll sue you and take every cent away from you, and I'll probably lose, but you're the last person I want to see in this business." So I went to Canada and helped start WestJet Airlines during that 5 year period of time and launched
I,
what is today Navitaire, $1 billion value company that does reservation systems. So, Herb, Herb
in
was,
typical David fashion, it's like I can't do that, so I'll just go somewhere else and create value.
yeah, but he was tender and sweet to me. But when it came time, he showed his fangs and said, "You're the last person I ever want to see in the airline business. So I'm going to keep you out as long as I possibly can."
Let me jump back to where I cut you off at that luncheon though, where you were going to Herb and what I was asking you about JetBlue and about sort of the vision to bringing humanity back to air travel. Yet at the same time, you had some very significant, if you will, service amenity breakthroughs that differentiated the airline and how you thought that the business model could afford those.
Yeah, so I was on a flight from Dallas to Salt Lake, and I sat down in a seat that was soaked with urine. That somebody had. It was a cloth seat that someone had sat in right before me, and I, stood up. I was in my suit. It was all wet, and I said to the flight attendant, "Look, somebody, you know, had an accident here in this seat." And they said, "The plane's totally full. You either sit in it for the whole flight or you can get off the airplane." So they gave me a blanket to sit on. And then the person had sat in front of me had moved in front, the same person, and had did it, got in the bathroom again, and then it came through and got on my socks. So at
Oh,
that point in time, I determined I was going with leather seats. That I was never going to have any of my customers have this happen to them. So I did the math, and leather seats cost twice as much, but they lasted 3 times longer. So I said they're cheaper. So why not put leather seats on all the airplanes? PETA didn't like that. Obviously, I got a lot of PETA stuff, but then eventually we went to the pleather, and then the TV set. People were thinking that somebody wanted a $5 soggy sandwich on the flight, and that cost about $5, and I could do live television for $1. So I was able to give people something different, something unusual, something that really resonated with them for less cost. Same thing with new airplanes. Our new airplanes, because they had maintenance holidays, they were more reliable. I got a really good price from Airbus for them. It was That's one of the lessons I learned at Southwest, with the help of John Owen, who was my first chief financial officer, who I brought from Southwest. He showed me the math. Buy a new airplane for a really good price. It's actually cheaper than flying a 20-year-old airplane.
and you've been big on Airbus and Embraer in all of your, well, obviously at Southwest you were running Boeings, but at your airlines, you've been a big fan of both Airbus and Embraer. Why not Boeing?
Well, it was funny because I gave Boeing the opportunity. It's a kind of a famous story where, we knew what, having hired John Owen from Southwest, I kind of knew what Southwest was paying for 737s, and I didn't expect that. Obviously they had ordered hundreds of them. We were just ordering 100, and so we put a little piece of paper in front of them and said, "Look, if you give it to us for this price, we'll shake right now." And they said, "No, that's too low." We said, "We're going to go talk to Airbus," and they said, "Well, go ahead," knowing that we would never select Airbus. And they had very effectively kept Airbus out of all the low fare carriers. No one other than nobody was flying the A320. The plane had been launched for 13 or 14 years, but nobody was flying it. So I flew back to Airbus, and man, they started showing me the 320, the fly by wire technology, the wider cabin, and I was just enamored with safety. And they talked about the flight protection envelope that you could create and not let a pilot do something that would create an unstable flight if you had fly by wire, but with cables and pulleys, um, um, you couldn't stop that. And then they took me in the simulator and showed me, a really unfortunate thing with Egypt Air. Had a captain that pitched the plane down, and they said, "Look, if that would never have happened on our plane." So I just And then we could put 162 seats on that airplane versus 147. So we had all those extra seats with lower fuel burn at the time. So I just became convinced in a day it was a better option. And then Boeing came back and offered us a lower price than was on my little piece of paper. But I was kind of already convinced that at that time the 320 was a better product. And then I said, okay, well, give me the 800. We were the 700, and I said, give me the 800 for the same price, and they refused. And then I shook with Airbus, and they came back and said, okay, you can have the 800. And I said, it's too late. I've already agreed to go with Airbus. So, it's those seminal moments that, and then as soon as JetBlue had all the success, then EasyJet and AirAsia and eventually Frontier and Spirit, everybody went with the 320 because we proved that you could operate it in a kind of a low cost environment.
And did the sort of interest in Embraer come from Azul, or had that come in when you were with JetBlue, when you had JetBlue in their start?
Yeah,
Did you
no,
have any
I was
Embraers at JetBlue, or was that all on Azul?
no, we launched the 190. They just flew the last 190 flight. JetBlue did just the other day, a couple weeks ago. I just felt like we needed a lower trip cost airplane to be able to go into other cities that so we could differentiate ourselves, and kind of became enamored with what Embraer was doing. Went down for the rollout, and decided to go with the 190 because it was just a different class of airplane. It wasn't like a regional jet, but it had 100 seats on it, and so we could fly to a lot of markets. And it was a really instrumental airplane for when we moved into Boston, because Boston was as big as New York, and we could do a lot of markets with a 190 that we couldn't do with the 320.
And David, I mean, JetBlue obviously took off, literally and figuratively. And you're on that kind of rocket ship, and you'd seen plenty of success previously at both WestJet as well as at Morris Air. So this wasn't like, wow, there's a whole new feeling of having everything going my way. But it was I would put forth, it was at a different pace, if you will. You were growing so fast and getting millions and millions of passengers into JetBlue. Was there a moment in that growth period where you were like, well, this is going too fast, where things are just happening, where we're expanding too fast, or we're kind of out over our skis trying to keep up with demand, where you sort of said, we've got to tether this back in, or were you and your team always capable of meeting that demand as JetBlue did that sort of up to the right trajectory?
It seemed right when we were there, but one of the things that in hindsight, I realized as I've gone and done bigger airlines and more complex airlines that we didn't have a foundation, and that was kind of the fault of our COO, really. He didn't have experience doing it, and then the board, when they removed me, they put him in charge to be the CEO. And it's man, today at Breeze, as to we're at 230 flights a day going to 1,000. I'm always pressing our people. Hey, will this take us to 1,000? Will this take us to 2,000? Will this take us to 1,500? When you evaluate all the people in every position on the bus, can this person take us to 1,000? So, I'm certainly a lot better at that today, given the experience level. But what happened on what we call the Valentine's Day Massacre, where we had an ice storm that came through New York and people were on planes for 6, 7 hours. And, I was, kind of instrumental in putting Humpty Dumpty back together again. But I realized that we were really deficient in communication with our crews, um, and we didn't have the kind of technology we have today. But life's a learning experience. And JetBlue had some really good years. It took a long time for the stock to get back, maybe 7 or 8 years after I left, to get back to where it was when I left. But they kind of got it figured out for a while, and times were good, and fuel was low, and they were able to pay for a lot of airplanes in cash. So it's and now they're kind of in a little more difficult situation. So, and the challenge for the today for them is they're kind of overlapped on 85% of their markets, and everybody has leather seats and brand and TVs and um, screens and brand new airplanes, and they have first class, and JetBlue doesn't have first class. So, um, you know, you have to evolve and you have to change, and things become some things that were just easy at some point in time become very difficult when people figure out what the model is and they can duplicate it.
You mentioned fuel costs, and I know that all the airlines used to hedge out their fuel costs, and I don't think any do today. Why is hedging out fuel costs now not an industry standard?
Well, because I think what happened during COVID, Southwest was always the kind of king of fuel hedging because we're in Texas, we know oil, we know fuel, and so and I had this theory at at Azul too. I said, look, guys, if the fuel goes below $40 a barrel, nobody can survive for a long term on $40 a barrel. So let's just go ahead and hedge below $40 if we can see that on the forward curve. And then COVID comes along and it goes to zero, and Azul gets a $250 million bill from the folks that were doing the hedging, and Southwest gets $1 billion bill. So it's a little bit like gambling in a sense, and maybe you have the black swan event that can really wipe you out if you do it, and it's kind of, I guess everyone's kind of settled on we're all going to, at least we'll all be doing the same thing, so nobody will be advantaged or disadvantaged. We're all kind of on the same page.
Yeah. When after having done JetBlue and then named Azul, I was hoping that your next airline, there was my favorite restaurant in Buenos Aires was a restaurant called Azul Profundo, and I thought you'd come back to the States and call it Deep Blue. But you started up Breeze, which, by the way, full disclosure to listeners, I'm an investor in Breeze, so I do have a line here to both. I don't have to wish for David's success because everything that David touches turns to gold. But with that said, I was attracted to Breeze purely because of you, David, and because of your track record. But it has been really fun to watch Breeze through its development life cycle as it's added these new routes, and you found this, if you will, again, a very distinct niche market. Talk for a moment, because we talked about what was unique about JetBlue. What's unique about Breeze? You're going to these cities where, generally speaking, they do not have direct connectivity to other city pairs, and as a result of it, I mean, I flew with somebody on Monday from Idaho Falls, Idaho, down to Denver, where he was connecting through to go to the East Coast, and I was fortunately getting off in Denver. But you know what? Our connection was delayed by, we were delayed by an hour and a half getting out of Idaho Falls due to weather in Denver, and he was going to miss his connection through. And you're sitting there going, I'm going to take you from Idaho Falls directly to wherever your spot's going to be. How have you defined A, the cities you're flying to, and B, the demand for that service? Because you've seen demand follow your supply in a way that, given I'm in the apartment business, all of our customers would love to know your secret sauce on figuring out where that demand is. Because everyone who owns an apartment building wants to know where everyone's moving to. So they look at, for instance, one-way U-Haul rentals, right? They want to figure out where people are moving and where we're getting good demand. You all have to go basically create that demand.
Right. So, I mean, just to take a step back about, why I even did Breeze in the first place. And this was before COVID. So COVID hit, we had 55 employees and didn't get any of that government money like all the airlines did, very little of it. Um, I looked at the United States and I'm like, do I really want to do this again? Azul was really successful. Prior to COVID, Azul had a market cap of $6 billion. We were the most profitable airline in the world, and we're voted the best airline in the world by TripAdvisor. And then it's been a rough go a little bit at Breeze, Azul, because of COVID, because we didn't get that government money, and now they're restructuring and things are going to be just fine. But at Azul, I learned the value of being the sole carrier on a market, and how much better we did flying sole carrier. And then I looked at what Allegiant was doing, and there were sole carriers. And then I looked at 125 cities that had lost more than 25% of their airfare over the last 10 years. And then I looked at, especially during COVID, the migration patterns as people were kind of moving from kind of the Midwest and the Northeast and going to Florida and then bouncing up to the Carolinas and that whole thing. And then I looked at the quality of product that, say Allegiant had compared to, what I had envisioned. And then I looked at this aircraft that was the Airbus A220. And I said, wow, all this kind of stuff fits together really interestingly, because I can do a trip. We don't focus on seat mile cost nearly as much as we focus on trip cost. What does it cost to fly A to B? And then I saw the scope clauses for the big airlines had that were kind of holding airplanes down to 74 seats. And then I saw this Airbus A220, you could fly to 145 seats, or if you wanted to put 12 first class seats on, you could go to 137. If you wanted to go to 20 first class seats, because of the efficiency of the cabin, you could go to 135 and have 20 first class seats and then still have 40 extra legroom seats. So, I in some ways we were lucky, in some ways we were good, because, I had learned that premium was important flying at Azul, because we had a business class section on international flights. And so because you were only getting rid of one seat per row, because we had a 2 and 3 seating configuration, we could do it very efficiently. And what we realized is we could get twice the fare, and it only took up 50% more room. And so that, if you can fill them up, that math works all day long. And then it was just the ability to fly nonstop to a bunch of routes that had lost their nonstop service. In our first 100 routes that we picked, we've been in over 2 years, those routes, initially 64 of those 100 routes hadn't had nonstop service for over 3 years, because the big airlines started we're bypassing them. We're actually forcing people to go through hubs. Places like Huntsville, Alabama, that was growing and people were in-migrating, but you had to go to all the hubs because there was no structural mechanism. The airplanes were too big. They had to send you to a hub, and there was no way to go from Huntsville to Orlando, or Huntsville to Las Vegas, or Huntsville to Tampa. So with our trip cost airplane, we knew that we could go into markets that didn't have the nonstop service. And today we've got over 300 routes, and those 100 that had no nonstop service. Today there's 87 still that we're the only one in, and we're flying those nonstop, and we do good in those. And we do have competition on about 15% of our routes, but we do very well, because in 24 of our 78 cities, we have more destinations, nonstop destinations, than any other airline that's in that city. So we become relevant by saying, okay, we fly to places that you either want to go or your family all moved to, and you want to go visit them, or they want to come visit you. And we can get you there for twice as fast. That whole stress of a connection is real. If you don't have to deal with that stress of your friend connecting in Denver and worrying about missing his flight and spend the night in Denver, or waiting 4 hours for the next flight, if there even is one, it gets people to travel more often. And we can get you there twice as fast for half the price. That's what we talk about.
That's such a great slogan.
And people love that. And then they say, well, okay, you fly to Vero Beach. Wow. I used to have to fly to Orlando and drive 2 hours, or West Palm Beach and fly for 2 hours. I think I'm going to go look for a place to buy at Vero Beach, because Florida real estate values are down. If I can buy a place and you can get me there for twice as fast that I could, or maybe 3 times as fast if it's Vero Beach, I'm going to go buy a place, and I'm going to fly you 12 times a year instead of just going down there 1 or 2 times a year. So if a market has what we call 15 PDUs, and this goes back to your central question you just asked, the DOT, and this is a leftover from the deregulated days, the regulated days. Everybody had to report their traffic. everything they flew and what the average fare was. So we have this perfect database of information. And if there's 15 people on average flying between two cities, we can make it work because we get a better fare, but the convenience is the bigger factor, and we can usually 4 or 5 times or maybe 8 times that market, and that's why I don't think we're a threat to the other airlines because we generate eight to 10 times more traffic than we steal from anyone because we generate it because it's just so much more convenient. Um, and then when you look at across the country, you say, well, how many markets fit that? And this article that came out recently, it was 367 airplanes worth of flying just on these 15 PDU markets. There's a couple thousand of them all over the country, and we're only in 300 markets. So there's a lot of room for growth as well.
When I hear you talk about that, David, it's fascinating. I know you like, for instance, Canton, Akron, Ohio, as one of your largest growing airports that you're serving, and I think your most traveled city pair is Provo, Utah to Santa Ana, California, because I think you've got two daily nonstops on that route, and I think that's your most frequent route. And it's just fascinating to me because, again, going back to the industry I'm in as it relates to apartments, there are a lot of apartment owners who would love to understand those drivers of demand. And quite honestly, someone hears that you're growing your presence in Canton, Akron, and that says, hey, people are there, they're getting access to other places. Maybe there's some job growth that comes after it. Maybe someone wants to move their headquarters there that they didn't think that Canton, Akron was the place they'd headquarters their company out of. And the next thing you know, you have a really nice multifamily market, a really nice retail market, et cetera, on the commercial real estate side. And I find it to be interesting about whether you all are sort of that, canary in the coal mine as it relates to opportunity for growth.
I think so, and it's also migration. I looked at there's a Wall Street Journal article where the top two in-migration states in the union, well, 2 and 3, I can't remember the first one, but 2 and 3 were North and South Carolina. And so there's a lot of people moving to the Carolinas, and there's a lot of people. Canton, Akron's a great place. I've got 2 daughters and son-in-laws and grandchildren that live in Dayton, Ohio. One's in the Air Force and one's in medical school. So it's a great place, but people migrate and they go to different places. And when you move from Ohio and you move to Raleigh, Durham, for whatever reason, for work or because of climate or whatever, then you got to go back for weddings and funerals and family get-togethers, and then family comes and visits you. And so these migration patterns are real, and they really and there's a lot of places like Rochester and Syracuse and Albany and that also have that kind of migration pattern, and it doesn't really work for others to not fly through a hub. You have to fly through a hub because of the higher trip cost. And so I think there's a lot of ways you can create markets. And I think back, Ryanair, I was just looking at their market cap this morning. They're $32 billion. They make $2.5 billion in profit a year. And they started by flying to places nobody even thought of or heard of. I remember they were flying from London down to some secondary airport in Toulouse, France. And I know Toulouse because that's what our 320s were made. Why didn't you fly into that airport? Well, we got this other airport for free. And then also all these British guys started flying down there, and they said, wow, I can buy a French country cottage for only 50,000 quid. I'm going to buy that. Next thing you know, all these people bought up these French country cottages, and they could go down there and drink their wine and have great food and get out of the dullness, the Tupperware lid that is London without sunshine. And all of a sudden, Ryanair is making a ton of money on that route because they've got thousands of people that own French country cottages. So, there's it's really interesting to pick routes and launch new cities, and we've just got a lot of happy guests. I mean, I've never seen NPS scores higher than what we have here at Breeze. I mean, it's unbelievable. We're bumping on 80 every week, and part of the reason is, and I've convinced our folks that we can do this, and that there's a maturity curve Because when you start flying in market, nobody knows you. They've never flown you before. You have no repeat business. And then as you start building that business, markets become profitable after about 6 months on average. But I've convinced people if we can be on time and try never to cancel a flight, then our maturity curve is steeper. It comes on a lot quicker. So
You had a 85% on time performance in September, and you didn't cancel a flight the entire month. I think that's right.
the entire quarter.
Yeah, entire quarter.
Yeah, we haven't canceled since the end of the first quarter. We canceled one flight, and we've flown. I think it's probably approaching 50,000 flights. Now
Wow.
we may send you late. We may have to overnight you, whatever, but
No, I
we're
got
going
it.
to get you there. Yeah, we have moved up. We were the number one on time airline in September, and we're still there in October, the number one on time with a few days to go. So that's our goal. We want to be number one on time, and we want to cancel almost zero flights if we can help it. And we do everything possible to make sure we don't cancel a flight. So, and the hurricanes have cooperated this year, which is the biggest factor for us. And obviously, if we have a heavy snowstorm, but other than that, we get them done. And not flying into congested airports helps.
Yeah, your comment about Ryanair, it brings me back many years when I was working for TPG and for David Bonderman, and we were going. Continental was trying to buy Aerolíneas Argentinas, and I was working on that deal. And at that time, David made an investment in Ryanair, and I had no idea what Ryanair was. And boy, would I have liked to have invested in Ryanair back in 1998 when David and other TPG members like Bill Franke of America West were all working together and putting money into Ryanair.
Well, David Bonnerman's he was a good friend, and he invested in Azul, and I was talking to him about Breeze. You know, he obviously before he passed away, but yeah, I miss him. He was a good man, a really good
He
man.
was a very good man. Um, Talk for a moment, David, as we're closing this out, as it relates to the pricing model that you have for Breeze is somewhat distinct in the sense you've got nice, nicer, and nicest, which I love. It's easy, it's transparent. You kind of come on and you just kind of say, okay, pick what you want, and you're very clear of, you want to be able to cancel your ticket, you go with a little bit nicer. And I love that. I think one of the big sort of criticisms that lower cost airlines in the United States are getting now is that you sort of feel like you're nickel and dime for every little thing that you're doing. And it feels like Breeze has figured out how to give some transparency there. You kind of pick the service offering you want. It's nice, nicer, or nicest, and you kind of go with it. Talk about how you've been able to be that transparent when it feels like a lot of your competitor firms are trying to kind of ding you on a fee here and a fee there.
Yeah, and it's really the genius of Lucas Johnson, who's our chief revenue officer. We really wanted, upsell is something that, but make people feel like they have value for what they're paying for. I remember my son was flying one of the ULCCs, and he has a big family, um, 8 kids, and they went to the gate, and every little kid had a backpack, and they charge him $100 for every little kid, for a carry-on. You got to carry a bag. And he calls me from the airport, and he said, I will never, ever fly these people again. I promise you. And it's like, it's not worth it. It's not worth ticking off your customers to make them have this visceral reaction that they'll never fly you again. So what we did is we just were upfront and said, hey, you want to go for a $39 fare, $49 fare, and you want to bring a backpack on board, and you want to put it under your seat, do it. You got it. But if you want to do a carry-on, or you want to check a bag, and you want extra leg room, and you want free Wi-Fi, how about if we do bundle all that together and charge you another $50? So we'll say 49 and then 99. You can have free check bag, free carry-on, free Wi-Fi, and a couple more inches of leg room. And they say, wow, that's a great deal. I'll do that. Thank you, Breeze. We love you. And then they come on the airplane and they go, wait a second, how much was that first class seat? We said, it's only another $100. And they go, okay, next time I'm going to buy that. And what we find, which is really unusual, instead of people trying to game the system and we get less revenue the next time, the people who fly us the second and third time, they end up spending more because it's aspirational. and we get these really high NPS scores. And now you've seen the other ULCCs and other people trying to do the same thing that we're doing, trying to hurry and run first class seats onto their airplanes and coming up with these bundles. But we got a great head start doing it, and people just love flying Breeze.
Airlines aren't typically viewed as sort of, if you will, that innovative, and Breeze won Fast Company's most innovative company in 2025. How do you keep innovating when you're, at the end of the day, you're moving people from point A to point B? I mean, there's only so much you can do as it relates to changing the amenities or the overall experience of air travel, yet you seem to, throughout your career, continually innovated as it relates to the companies you've started. But as you sit there with Breeze now, how do you and your team sit around and say, how are we going to continuously be innovating on this product and service?
Well, I think technology is really key to that. Technology has to help you innovate. I would love for everyone who booked an ascent seat or a first class section to get a text the day before saying, "Hey, we got this amazing buffalo filet mignon sandwich, or in Rochester these famous wings. You want to click here and we'll serve them to you on the airplane." And have that kind of level of service. But we got to get the basics right first, and then we'll move on to that kind of stuff. So, AI, getting to know our guests, getting to know what their travel patterns are and what they really enjoy, and being able to serve that up to them, I think is kind of the next big thing. Doing AI with predictive maintenance, and a lot the operations side has the use of AI as well. So, and then just listening to your guests and listening to your team members, and coming up with ideas, kind of the next big thing that we're going to do, that will be kind of transparent a little bit to our guests, but it's going to help our operation immensely, is we're actually buying two private jets, that are going to be rescue planes that will provide, we'll be able to take technicians and parts, or a fresh crew, pilots and flight attendants, if we're experiencing a mechanical delay or a weather delay, to avoid it, to try and eliminate even more cancellations or delayed flights. And that will just happen. Imagine you get up to Portland, Maine, and you say, "Hey, sorry, ladies and gentlemen, this airplane has this issue. We've identified what it is. Just to let you know, we've just taken off out of Charleston, South Carolina, with our company jet, with two technicians and the part on board. They'll get here in about an hour, take them 30 minutes to fix it. And so here, we're going to give you $20 to go have some lunch." It's just those kinds of innovations that people really appreciate. Your flight didn't get canceled. They didn't have to reroute you. They just go to lunch and your plane's fixed and ready to go. So, those are things that we're doing behind the scenes to be even more reliable. And amazingly so, we save a ton of money by doing that, because we'll have the cost for it, but we'll save a lot more than we'll spend. So, you just got to keep thinking outside the box, and with safety as your number one priority, but then thinking about how can we make this airline better for our guests, so they love us even more than they love us today.
I know from listening to previous interviews, David, I heard you say one thing that is, people look back on you at some point, you'd love for people to say that you made their lives better. And it's very clear that both through the service you provided as well as the companies you started, you made a lot of lives better. The other one is that you make your own luck. And it's very clear that you're a hustler. You're someone who doesn't let either degree of difficulty or challenges get in your way as it relates to moving from one thing, creating all these airlines and doing so successfully as you have. A lot of people think that there are entrepreneurs and there are managers, and that you're sort of in one or the other buckets. You're either a great entrepreneur who comes up with lots of ideas, or you're a great manager who can take the idea and actually implement it. You've been fortunate and capable to do both. How do you feel those two sides of your brain working all the time and kind of competing with each other, or is it all one approach, if you will? And if there is one side of the brain that's actually winning out, is it more on the entrepreneurial side or more on the manager side?
No, I think it's, for me, it's, the managing tedious day-to-day stuff that's why I have great people. I think where I kind of excel is the idea and then operationalizing it. You know, because when I'm in a room with, all of our executives and I'm saying, why can't we just do this? And they're saying, it's too complicated. I'm saying, okay, well, you make everything sound so easy and you kind of simplify everything to, and sometimes I do and it's not possible, but a lot of the times, being able to unravel complex issues and simplify them just by saying, no, we do this first and we do this second. So, and this third. So you can't come up with an idea unless in your mind you can operationalize it and prove to everyone else using facts and data that you could actually do it differently and do it better. And so there's always that tension of new idea. How do we operationalize it? How do we effectuate it? How do we make it happen? And so when you have a rescue plane, you have to figure out what plane you're going to have, who's going to fly those planes, how what's the call out time, how close to the airport they're going to be, where are the reserve crews going to be, so you can have pilots and flight attendants on reserve. How are you going to mass all the parts into a warehouse? How are you going to have extra technicians to be able to do it? So there's a lot of factors that go into it. So in my brain, I go through all those and anticipate all that stuff and figure it out. So when those things come up, I feel like I have an answer for it. Or I don't, and would say, yeah, that's not a good idea. We shouldn't do it.
Well, you've clearly had a lot of answers over a very, very interesting and successful career. And I'm super thankful of you taking the time to share it with us today on the Walker Webcast. I'm also, as I mentioned, a very thankful shareholder of Breeze, and I look forward to seeing you either in Utah or maybe you and I will hop on a Breeze flight at some time together, and I can actually see what it's all about.
Let's do it. You got to do it.
Be great. David, thank you very much. It's great to talk to you. Really appreciate
Thank
it.
you. Thanks, Willie.
Have a great day.
You too.